All right, welcome again, and I think we can begin now. So this is the last day of the forum. We have 3 sessions ahead of us. We will start with one of the important topics of disaster-related statistics. How do we estimate direct material impact and economic loss from disasters? And our session 7 is the continuation of technical discussions that we actually had in this room in the afternoon. And what we are going to do, what I'm going to do now is that I'm going to quickly recap what happened in the afternoon for the benefit of our online participant colleagues. And then we, as you can see, that I'm joined by many people on this table, and we are going to hear perhaps mostly of the whole session from the experts on the table. Just in terms of the background of this session, as we all know, the Sendai Framework Global Target C, SDG 152 and 1152 calls for information on direct economic loss attributed to disaster in relation to global GDP. So this is the indicator that all countries are asked to measure and also report to the Sendai framework and the SDGs. The question comes, how do we go about measuring this information? So if we believe in the formula that value equals quantities times price, now we're talking about 2 factors here. One is the quantity. So if when it comes to disaster impact, then the accounting of physical damage or lost assets, productions, or the products or output is usually conducted as part of the disaster impact assessments. So we in all countries, when disaster occurs, the mandate of the disaster agency would also main part of it is for risk operation, and within that operation, data collections on physical damage to the affected area. So that's where we usually get the so-called Q. Once we collect all this physical damage information, then the next question would be, to get to the value, then what prices should we use then to estimate direct economic loss in monetary terms? And we ask this question because we don't only have one price in the country. There are several price systems. For NSO colleagues joining online, you also know that in the system of national accounts, we have different set of price called basic prices, producer prices, purchaser prices. If we look at it from the DR community perspective, there are questions, if let's say if one house is destroyed, should we value it at the original value, the price of the house that the owner bought? Or should we look at that value, but in terms of the depreciation over time? Or should we adjust it with inflation? Or maybe we have to look at it as the as-built replacement cost, the cost that that will be required to build the house back as close to the previous disaster condition as possible. Or, and this question come up a lot, that once you need to repair or rebuild your house, should you also make sure that the new house that you have would withstand the new disaster that may come? Then the cost wouldn't be the same as the as-built replacement cost. So we maybe call it improved replacement cost. So there are more than one set of price that we have to consider. And we know that this is a challenge. And there are a lot of manuals out there, but perhaps we want to have something very tangible that all countries might be able to agree and implement going forward. So the objective of the session is to contribute knowledge and experiences from countries around the world towards internationally agreed or maybe comparable measures of direct economic loss from disaster. And we did that by understanding, first of all, why do we need this information from policy perspective? It's imperative that we understand user needs before we conduct any statistical data collection exercise. Once we understand the demand, Then we hear from country practices and challenges in issues surrounding valuation of direct economic loss from disaster. And we actually hope that all the discussion that we actually had today in the afternoon in Bangkok would contribute to a specific guidance in the global framework for disaster-related statistics. So with that, as I mentioned, this session was broken down into two parts. The afternoon, Bangkok afternoon part from 2 to 5 p.m. was in person. And then what we are having now is a part 2 of this session from now to 7:55. So just one note for our online colleagues that when disaster hits the country, it impacts all economic sector. And we thought that we did not have enough time to cover all sectors. So we focus on the two priority sectors that we have and commonly agreed and important sector. One is the agricultural sector that we focus on both crop and livestock. We also focus, discussed housing and infrastructure sector. I have a technical issue with, okay, thank you. Now, when we talk about direct economic loss, one thing that we want to be guided by is how to define it. So we follow generally on the SDG indicator metadata. Just in nutshell, the SDG indicator metadata suggests that we define direct economic loss as the monetary value of physical damage. And we touch upon in the room a lot on indirect economic loss, although that wasn't the primary focus, but it came back to us that it's also important to discuss indirect economic loss as we go in discussing direct economic loss. So this is what we did in the afternoon here in Bangkok. We will start with, as I mentioned, understanding policy demand. So we had one very good panel discussion on policy demand for improved disaster-related economic loss information. Then we heard from several perspectives on how different agencies and organizations globally have dealt with economic loss estimation. So we heard from FAO, OECD, and the study that was conducted under the umbrella of the interagency expert group for disaster-related statistics. And the bulk of the time in the afternoon was the breakout group technical discussions, and the group focused on 4 main questions. The first group focused on what prices we should actually use in value direct economic loss in agricultural sector. Second group focus on the same thing, but in the housing and infrastructure sector. Now the third group bring us to the issues surrounding measurement for sudden onset and slow onset disasters. And with all this in mind, we know that to sustain the operation and estimation of this information, we need collaboration between NSO, who usually have the price and valuation expertise in the country, and also MDMA, who is usually functioned as their mandate in collecting physical damage information. Then the question would be how to enhance the collaboration to make sure that the economic loss information that produced within statistical system would make sense and reflect what we actually meant them to be. So that was the key questions that we had in the afternoon, and we divided into 4 tables. And I don't think I would summarize everything because I have experts on the table here who will bring us through everything. So this is what we're going to do now. That we're going to we have some Mentimeter questions. If we could launch it now. So for online participants, feel free to use the link as it will show soon. And for colleagues in the room, we will have the QR code. And we're going to come back to to review the results later after the expert talk. So this is the QR code, and I think we also have the link somewhere there. So we can also post in the chat box for our virtual participants. With that, I'll hand over to the moderator for the next session, for the next section of our session, Alec.
Thank you, Tirapong, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, colleagues. My name is Alec Nyasulu. I'm from the Statistics Division of ESCAP, and I'll be moderating this discussion. I have a team of 5 panelists, and I'll introduce them as we go. I think if you have any questions to the panelists, please do, especially for our online participants, please feel free to put them in the chat box. So our first panelist is Dr. Hemraj. He is the Deputy Chief Statistician for the Central Bureau of Statistics of Nepal. So Hemraj, you go first, and I just want you to give us insights on what has happened this afternoon, particularly with respect to prices that could be used to measure economic loss within the agricultural sector. So Hemraj, I give you the floor.
Thank you, Alec. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. This afternoon, we discussed a lot with around more than 40 participants who were representative of more than 20 countries and institutions. We have a table discussion for more than 1 hour, and then the summary that I'm going to present are what are the prices that have to be included, that have to be taken into consideration for the direct impact of the economic loss. And that was the major question that we discussed. And then the summary of the findings was that it should be the market price of the crops and livestock, market price of the stocked food items, or market price of the even the same applies for the livestock product like milk and meat and others. But the challenge was that really these market prices are available at the time of the disaster or not. We discussed with many countries, and there was a variation among the countries on the price monitoring system. Few countries has a very high frequency of the price data, like weekly price information, monthly price information. Few countries had quarterly price information system, and few had annual price information system. Then when disaster occurs, then which price should have to be used? And what has been observed in many areas is that the price before the disaster are different than the price after the disaster. Because when disaster occurs, then generally the price hikes, price increases. That has been observed in many countries. That's why the decision was we have to take the average weighted price. If the prices are available for that particular day at the time of the disaster, then those prices should have to be taken into consideration for estimating the economic loss. If the particular day or particular week the prices are not available, then we have to focus the previous prices as well as the later on prices. And again, we can do some weighted average. The average is before the disaster and after the disaster. And even the price differs according to the commodity. For example, price of the rice may not be equivalent to the price of the maize and others. That's why we have to distinguish between the prices between cereals itself, between the perishable commodities like fruits and vegetables, milk and meat, because the price of these perishable commodities differs from time to time. Even the price of the vegetable in the morning will be different from the price of the vegetable in the afternoon. That's why it's quite challenging for these perishable crops. And these are the most affected crops. Anyway, we decided that we have to use the disaggregated average weighted market price at the time of the disaster if available. If not, then we have to make some proxies. That was the agreement on the crop sector. Regarding the livestock sector, there are different opinions, and then one major opinion is that even livestock has different categories. The cattle are different than the sheep and goats, which are again different with the poultry, the dogs and chickens. That's why only the numbers will not give us the clear idea of the economic loss. We need to have some disaggregation of the prices. For example, if this is a cattle, what is the purpose of this cattle? It is for milking purpose, or this is for meat purpose? Or then what is the age group of that cattle? It is less than 3 years, or this is 3 to 10 years, or what is the variety of that cattle? It is a local one or the improved one. If that type of disaggregated data are available on price system, then it will be very easy for us to estimate the total economic loss. If these details are not available, and in most of the countries, yes, frankly speaking, these data are not available. That was the response from the colleagues on the table this afternoon. If these data are not available, then we have to do some proxies. And then one proxy that was suggested was like doing a tropical livestock unit, which is very common in SDG measurement phenomena as well. We have to convert all livestock into tropical livestock unit, and then there are few prices, standard prices, at least at the national level, if not at the regional level. If prices are available at the regional level, again, we can use those prices at the regional level. If not at the regional level, then we can use at the national level, or even maybe some previous prices. That was the agreement on estimating the total loss from agriculture sector. And finally, we came into the conclusion, the table at that time came into the conclusion that at least we have to establish some system of price monitoring of crops and livestock. Though there are variety of crops in the countries grown, maybe 5 or 6 types of the cereals, 30 or 40 types of the vegetables, around 40 types of the fruits and more, even roots and tubers, spice crops, and even the industrial crops. Many crops are grown. Few crops are temporal. They are harvested within a short period of time, and then some are perennial. For example, the fruit crops are perennial, and then even there should have to be different techniques for the estimation of this loss for these temporary crops as well as perennial crops. In this way, we decided to use the weighted disaggregated regional price before and after the disaster to estimate the total economic loss on the agriculture sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Hemraj. Thank you for those great insights. Maybe before I ask our next panelist, did anything come up on farm gate prices or anything to do with commercial use of crops or subsistence use? Just bearing in mind that there are some farming practices that are not necessary for the market. So maybe you can just for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Elik, once again. Yes, that was the issue of the discussion, that if you ask with the farmer about the price after the disaster, then automatically they will be overestimated. And then if you will use the minimum support price that is being implemented by the government, again, it will be always lower or sometimes higher than the market price. That's why to get the real information, and then better we can use the farm gate price, which doesn't include the taxes, the subsidies and transportation cost, which are like basic prices that Terapung was showing to us. If these farm gate prices are available, that will give us the best estimate. If farm gate prices are not available, then again we have to move to the market, which are generally available. Again, there is a risk of overestimation in some cases or underestimation in some cases if you are using the proxies. That's why averaging, even the weighted average, will be the best option. That was the discussion in our group. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go to our second panelist, Ms. Aisha Shazna. She's a statistician from the Maldives Bureau of Statistics, to give us some perspective and insights on what her team has discussed with respect to prices on economic loss relating to housing and infrastructure. So Shazna, you have the floor. I'll give you 4 minutes. Yeah.
Thank you, Alik. Yeah, as in our group, actually table 2, we discussed on the how we could come up with the economic loss for the infrastructure and housing and infrastructure. And as we are talking about the damage to properties from residential as well as commercial as well as institutional, looking at different country practices while the discussion went well, different countries are using similar approaches to come up with the economic loss actually. And mostly they value the economic loss to compensate for the loss actually at the moment. And for them to, compensate accordingly, most countries do an assessment. And based on the assessments, they come up with
Sur la base de cette évaluation,
market
которые базируются на текущих рыночных ценах, они компенсируют эти потери.
Está basado en el
as well. Likewise for in Pakistan,
على نوع المباني مثلا في باكستان.
Kacha, and maybe I'm not pronouncing well, maybe the different types of buildings as such. And for Vanuatu case, they see as traditional housing, and for modern housing as well, they do different types of valuations on the current market prices. And as per the discussions we had, the approach that all the countries did agree on was the replacement costs, which are the estimates for the reconstruction or the replacement for the damage as such cost. And also which we identified as an advantage for the replacement cost accounting was that these values are based on the observed transactions and aligned with the actual expenses or the real costs for restoring the assets as well. And replacement costs are part of the broader productive activities of the economies as well. And we discussed about the challenges the countries are facing. And also we found out that they do not have pre-event, the disaster, they do not have proper inventory or registers established at country level on the dwellings or the infrastructure which is in the country as such available. And that was a huge problem which most of the countries do have, and some countries do have, but likewise in the Maldives, we do have the buildings needs to be approved by the housing ministry, but they do have records, but it's not yet being processed as such in a usable format. So it's not being used when the event is occurred. And also a problem was finding reliable and relevant data sources to estimate these costs as such. And also relying on different data sources was a problem. Likewise, for example, for the buildings, the BOQs, the quantity surveys, as well as industry reports. All these sources were maybe outdated or incomplete in most of the cases, and also making adjustments and assumptions for quantity, the quality, as well as the functionality and the efficiency of the buildings, as well as compatibility and so on, was highlighted as a challenge. And also the lack of technical expertise in the countries to come up with this cost was identified as a challenge. And looking at the possible solutions, we found out that all the countries do agree that they do need to come up with well-maintained, updated registries pre-event, as well through administrative records at the government agencies or any other agencies, or through we could also go for the big data options, like yesterday we've highlighted in one session that OpenStreetMaps were beneficial to after something has happened, if they do have the pre-event ones as well. And also broadly saying for our housing and infrastructure, we do agree that the administrative records needs to be strengthened, as well as the price indices needs to be strengthened. Yeah, that's what. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Shazna, for sharing insights with respect to losses and prices in the housing and infrastructure areas. I will go to the third panelist, Ms. Eileen Kaplit. She's a senior statistician in the UN Economic Commission for Africa. So Eileen, give us some perspectives and what was the discussion on in your group, which was actually discussing and brainstorming on whether there should be differences in approaches to measuring direct economic loss between sudden onset events like earthquakes and the slow onset disasters such as droughts. So I give you 5 minutes and let's hear what the thoughts are there on that kind of pricing. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Alik. So in our group, we focus our discussion mainly on 4 major points. So one is on the feasibility, on the differences, and then the second is on the feasibility, and then how it aligns with GDP and the policy uses. And so we come up with some preliminary recommendations. So a lot of discussions on the room, on the table was on whether we need to, whether the slow onset disasters can be directly measured. And the answer is yes, some of them. When you talk about La Nina or El Nido, which was the same mistake that I said in the table hosting, or El Nino, you somehow capture it in the national accounts because the production losses and some of the livestock losses experienced throughout the drought is already reflected in the national accounts. So in a lot of ways. So in this particular example, what we recommend is to actually within the slow onset disaster categories, you will have subclasses or subcategories identifying which can be directly measured or through which can be where we can use direct estimation, just like how we calculate the sudden hazard, or we can do indirect estimation for zone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We did not come up with a very firm list because that's not the objective of the table, but this is part of the thinking that was going around the table. So other than that, one important finding is in the same light, some countries are already having a form of management plan at the sub-local level, the lowest level, the district level. Okay, they have the system which will allow the government to push for monitoring. But the problem is there's no implementation. But the good thing is you have the foundation. And then there are some countries which has data but do not have the foundation. So therein lies another input to what we call as, and then before I go to the final recommendation, so there are existing country cases where the slow onset is actually happening and is felt. Countries like Fiji, who is already experiencing trouble accessing to their water. What used to be available on the ground because of the rising sea level, they can no longer access readily. No ready access to these things. So because of this, they are forced to estimate, because the cost of just transporting the water from one island to the other or one location to the other becomes higher. So, and because of this, they have their estimation already, direct estimation of the onset, of the slow onset. So which is why the group in the table, those who were coming and going on the table, found that it would be best to actually make use of all the existing framework, have a review of literature, and have a review of literature of all these frameworks existing or methodology that are existing to come up with a common framework or a global framework, which is practical enough for countries to take on for their own estimation methodology. And that's basically how the conversations went.
Thanks, Irene. Maybe before I ask our next panelist, just a quick question. Did you, your team or your group consider about the assessment period, for example, between the beginning and the end of the slow onset?
That's a very good question. That's a very good question, but as I've said, we did not tackle the specifics because there are existing guidelines, and the thing is we have to review all of them to come up with something that is more concrete and where you're not really reinventing the wheel, but actually trying to find a way to strike a balance between all the things that all these frameworks are saying.
Okay, I hope our friends online maybe can also give some comments on this in the chat if you think there are some ideas you can pose on that one. So thanks, Eileen, and I'll go to our next panelist. She's Ms. Suhaya Komari, our Deputy Director, Department of Statistics, Malaysia. So the issues that were tackled on this table is how collaboration could be enhanced between disaster management agencies and statistical offices on how they can improve economic loss estimation. So you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Ali. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. So this afternoon, the group has discussed on how to enhance the NSO and NDMA collaboration in estimating the economic loss. Overall, every country, I think they have the same problem in collaborating in terms of agencies, not only NSO and DNMA, but also in other agencies. So in many countries, the evaluation of direct economic losses comes under the responsibility of a disaster management committee. Typically, the NSO is not a part of this committee and only receives finalized data towards the end of the process. So it can be unclear where the valuations have been arrived at, and they can also be missing information and other quality issues to the data received by the NSO. So what the group has discussed was a key recommendation then would be for the NSO to be represented in this disaster management committee in order to provide guidance on valuation or quality assured data. I think in some countries, they will need to be a mandate specific from the Prime Minister offices, for example, giving the NSO the responsibility for participating in the committee or bringing the data together from the different agencies for loss evaluation. For this to happen, there is need to be a clear articulation of what the NSO can add to the process. For example, expertise on evaluation or quality assurance. The second recommendation also that to develop interagency committees to be established on disaster statistics, bringing together the NSO and NDMA and other relevant agencies. This committee can be used to disseminate guidance and discuss or address issues as they arise. Another recommendation was to place a statistical officer inside the NDMA. This could be someone on secondment from the NSO or a statistician recruited by the NDMA. They could play an important role in quality assuring the data before it is finalized and provided to the NSO. It may also be beneficial to NDMA staff to spend some time sitting with NSO staff in their offices to understand how the data are used for the production of statistics. In many of the countries, the data are collected by the NDMA at the local or community level before being aggregated to the regional and then national levels. It was therefore suggested it could be beneficial for the NSO to provide training or some kind of training to NDMA staff at the field level, giving guidance to help improve the consistency and accuracy of the data collected. The ideal is to take the whole of government approach with NSO and NDMA staff having access to the same system data, working on the figures in collaboration. So that's part of what we have discussed this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Suhaya. And I think we've heard from all the four table hosts, and I think it was very much on the production side. And now, last but not the least, we would like to hear from the policy side of things. So I'll be inviting Mr. Juan Chi. He's a statistician from the UNDRR. And I just want to find out and ask you to give us some policy perspectives in terms of data demand relating to economic loss in the sectors we've covered here. So from the policy angle, what are the issues that we are missing, or what should the producers actually need to know? So you have the floor.
Thank you, Alec. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues. I'm here to summarize on behalf of a very interesting and informative panel in the afternoon session, which include our colleagues from Palau, Bangladesh, and UNDRR. Colleague has been sharing a lot of very valuable information and experiences on how to collect, use, and disseminate direct economic loss data, and especially what are the challenges and how are we overcoming these challenges. For instance, the colleague from Palau have shared with us that the direct economic loss data in Palau was collected at the onset of a disaster, first through a situation overview, and then going through initial damage assessment, and then stepwise going to the next step of comprehensive damage assessment, and eventually ended with the PDNA assessment. And also in Bangladesh, we have data coming from land ministries, and then this data are gathered, collected, and summarized in the Ministry of Disaster Management. So a variety of different approach on this data collection. In terms of the use of the economic loss data, there's a variety of demand and use, including, for instance, to inform national master development plans, to update the operation on the national disaster management framework. And also it could be very helpful to help identify the best evacuation shelters and sites for future disasters. Also, country have mentioned that it informs on the investment, where the investment should be put the focus on. For instance, if there's a flood and then a lot of people are need shelter, then the river embankment and rehabilitation needs a huge amount of investment, and where and how to direct them. It's a good use of this direct economic loss data. With this being said, there are still many challenge lies ahead. For instance, colleagues have shared that it's very difficult sometimes to separate direct versus indirect losses. There's no structured methodology, or sometimes a lack of data on which part of the loss is direct or which part is indirect. A lack of baseline data. For instance, if we want to capture and measure the loss of economic loss, then we need to know the original, for instance, the GDP, the profit, the budget, and those data are sometimes not fully captured because of one way or another reasons. So this could create additional difficulty and trouble to estimate the economic loss. To overcome this, country have been proposing on tax reformation to capture more profit reporting on the baseline. And also, countries have shared that the lack of manpower and human resources expertise, especially funding, continue to pose as a consistent and a big challenge. In this regard, more training on staff, especially on the ground level, on the front line, is much needed. Also, the data might take very long to collect, and the delay of data will pose a challenge for the response. There is a data gap sometimes between the NSOs and NDMOs. It could be caused by many potential reasons. One of them is the legal difference, as some of the administrative data were not validated by NSO. So this could create a data gap between the agencies. And last but not the least, the inflation adjustment can be difficult to be kept updated in real time. So these are some of the national perspectives that the country have been shared. On the global scale, we would like to mention that direct economic loss data are collected through Sendai Framework Monitor and the Desaventar database, and they have been used to report on the SDG Global Monitoring database, and also on other thematic areas and sectors with other UN agencies, international organizations, and all type of stakeholders. The good news in the recent year is direct economic loss is on a decreasing trend. The bad news is still remaining very, very high, and it is unacceptable that we keep this trend. We have to look at the data not only on the global scale, but realize that that economic loss distribute unevenly. In some region and some country groups, it is hit much harder than the others. The challenge remains in the global scale as well, on disaggregation of sector and hazard and infrastructure types data, on the combination of physical loss and calculating the estimation of economic loss with country reported economic loss data, and also on how to capture both large and small scale data, large and small scale disaster event, because usually the large scale event are very easy to be captured by the general audience and the news, but the small scale disasters, although they might not be so newsworthy, they add up very quickly, and we need to be able to capture them, because we cannot manage something that we cannot measure. And the economic loss data has to be continuously and systematically captured to inform investment, to reduce vulnerability, and to strengthen resilience to protect the country from future disasters events. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the policy perspectives. So just briefly, are there any comments or questions from our online participants? Feel free to put your hand up. I do not see any hand. Then I'll just briefly open the floor, particularly well, I think everyone has been into the group. So if there's anything that you want to add on to what the table hosts have highlighted, please, this is the time. Yes, introduce yourself when you speak.
Good evening, good morning, or good afternoon. My name is Tony Labillois. I'm from Canada, from our national statistics agency called Statistics Canada. I wanted to thank the panelists, and I wanted also to ask if there was a country that had a successful example of collaboration or data integration for the household registries or infrastructure registries? And if that country could share a bit the best practices or lessons learned in that example.
Thank you. Before we respond to that, maybe we can take the next question.
I don't have a question.
Okay. So maybe I'll ask one of the panelists to react to this. Yeah, Eileen, you wanna?
At least in the people that came to my table, it was clear that there is no such integration yet that's happening, and it could be part of this this common global framework or compendium of frameworks that can be included as an item. But thank you for that input. Thank you.
Can I get a little bit? Regarding the inventory of the household and dwellings, or even the infrastructures, yes, we recently conducted one population census where we have at least listed the number of dwellings, number of households, number of dwellings by purpose. Are they for? It's for Nepal that I am representing. By the purpose of the house, is this for business purpose or government purpose or for housing purpose or for health purpose or education purpose or something like that, and where it is located. So exact locations are not collected on the GIS format, but at least the administrative level data, which municipality, which ward, which enumeration area has been collected. And I think in many other countries also that practice may exist.
Thank you. Thank you, Hemraj. Rahul, introduce yourself to the online audience as well.
Sure.
Just briefly, a minute.
I'll just say I'm Rahul Sengupta from UNDRR. Before I move to my comment, just to add to what colleagues mentioned, there is one particular recent example, not from the meeting today or what we heard, but that of Uruguay. Uruguay has recently in their census incorporated some vulnerability related information to be part of the census kind of surveys that are collected. So that we thought was a very good example or experience, and that could be emulated other places. We are in touch with our regional office to see how this good practice can be shared further. So just on the earlier comment that but do you want to make?
Yes, indeed, I would have just to add to Hem and what Rahul had mentioned. Indeed, there are dwelling information in the household, but in terms of actually valuing it, that's a serious problem, because we attempted to use this several times for the international comparison program, but to no avail. So I think it's critical now that the conversation is here. We need to start putting a value to the dwelling that we actually collect from the census. Thank you.
Rahul, finish.
Okay, so just my earlier comment was related to the table that I was on with Eileen on the time scale of slow onset and fast onset disasters. Just one point I wanted to make was because you also asked whether you were looking at the start dates and end dates. So one thing that we have seen that in the DRR community and the climate community, it's very relative. What is fast onset for slow onset for disaster community, what is a drought for the climate community is a very short time span. So it's very difficult to say that we are looking at the same time span. So that's extremely important. As you know, IPCC, if you look at, they're looking at sea level rise. It's a very long-term time scale. So that we have to keep in mind when we are looking at estimation of costs and others, and then there is questions on SDGs. SDGs is a reporting mechanism, but some of these losses that we are seeing across long-term losses that we are seeing go across years is very, very difficult to estimate by the years. So this is an important aspect, because the whole conversation was around fast onset and slow onset, which is very relative. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rahul. So I think I'll close the question and answer session for this moment, and I would like to thank all our 5 panelists for giving us their perspectives on what's happening in their respective tables regarding economic losses. So we'll go to the last part of session 7 on summary of policy demands. So I'll hand over to my colleague Tirapong.
Yes, I'm given an honor to summarize everything in 5 minutes. I think what I'm going to do is I'm not going to repeat everything that our experts has already mentioned, but a few key points that I think I gathered from sitting on the tables and also hear from colleagues here. From the user perspective, we know that this information is not easy to collect, but the demand is there, and they need it like yesterday. So we can't wait 2 years to have this correct information, while during the 2 years, people are dying, households are suffering, and we don't have information to make better DR policies. So that is a balance to strike between the methodology that we have that could work with a certain level of quality that could respond to the demand that actually needed very quickly. And from the 4 topics that we discussed, it's very clear that whether we touch upon agricultural sector, housing, slow onset, or collaboration, we want to build on and even enhance existing national statistical systems. We want to make sure that data as actually already within your system would be utilized before we even thinking of collecting new ones. And experts are in your country. The question would be, how do we bring them together, right? So I think these are the points that we hear a lot, and the group trying to work towards practical recommendations, not only what should be done in theory, but what could be done in different contexts. That we have all countries represented in this room, and in absence of the best plan A, these are B and C and D that you could consider, because we have to respond to the demand that you cannot actually wait. So I think these are the key points that I would like to highlight. And with that, I hope we have some response to our meta questions. If we could see some of the results, I think we have a few questions, and we can review that very quickly. That will also give us some perspectives as well from our online audience. I think the slide is coming. So the question is, first question is very simple. Do you produce statistics on direct economic loss from disaster? So most of them, like more than 50% said no. And no wonder, because it's so difficult. So some of them has attempt, yes. Then there are 3 respondents say, I don't know. So the second question, so which agency in your country is responsible for producing those statistics? And coming the first in the rank is the NDMA, as our table said. That is kind of the given mandate to the NDMA, right? And then we followed by the NSO. Actually, the third rank is others. We don't know yet who, but I'm sure there will be other agencies that would be involved in this area of statistics. So the third question, is there a collaboration between government agencies in this area? Usually we say yes, but quite weak. That's some area of improvement that we can look into. But again, if we look at the chart, 1/4 of it say yes, there's strong collaboration. That is actually very good news. Then the next question touch upon on the role of the NSOs in this area of statistics. For most of the responses, provide relevant data and statistics. So my voice has Okay. Okay, I hope so. Right, if you cannot hear, perhaps you can. Okay, it's better now. Okay, perfect. Sorry, so the previous question was in terms of how do you use economic loss information for, and the answer is very clear: for planning purposes. And we have to keep this in mind that data users are waiting for this data for planning purposes. The last question, if you could choose 3 most important challenges in producing this information.
Donc, ensuite, quelles sont les difficultés pour
we can clearly see that the first 2 or 3 main hits would be on the lack of technical knowledge,
le
insufficient
manque de connaissances
and collaboration. So with that, I would end this session, but thank you everyone for your engagement the whole day today. And I'm sure this is the starting point of something better in the future. So we'll move to the next session. Thank you so much.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Shall we start the next session?
Yes, thank you very much. And we continue today with the very short breaks. Yeah, so we will start the next session in just 3 minutes. And I'm very happy to see that Julie is there as our chair of the next session.
Good.
All right. So Julie, whenever you are ready, you are good to go.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm Julie House. I'm from the U.S. Bureau of Analysis and of Economic Analysis, actually. And I have the privilege of the chairing and moderating the session 8, which is accounting for disaster risk reduction expenditures. Next slide. We are going to have one question for the Mentimeter quiz, and that is related to the question of if these kinds of expenditure statistics existed in your country, what could you use them for? Because although we want to talk about that, and that is one of the focus of this session, we actually, since it's really hard to know what it could be used for when we don't actually have these types of statistics. So please give your ideas on if these could exist, what would you use them for? Let's go to the next slide, please. The objectives of our session are to basically talk about the challenges with compiling and using disaster risk reduction expenditure information, and also discuss how satellite accounts like these could be further developed. And some of the key questions that we're going to be looking from, having our panelists discuss, are what are the main challenges in compiling these types of accounts? How can they be used? That's from the survey we've got for you to participate in. And the third question is, what are the important areas to further develop and include in the disaster-related statistics framework? So let's go on to the next slide. We've got four of us here today, myself and Daniel Clark from the OECD. Now, Daniel and I ran into each other first in New York City when he was working for UN Statistical Division there. And then we ran into each other occasionally other places. He has worked on the framework for disaster-related statistics. And all of a sudden we were in Mongolia and he was working on the Ulaanbaatar city group, and I had the pleasure of spending time with him there as I was working with the Mongolian Statistics Office. Then we have Mr. Polaris Bautista from the Philippine Statistics Authority, and he's going to talk about the experience that the Philippines have in developing exactly these kinds of statistics. And finally, we have Diana Cardenas Molnay, who is very busy and working as a consultant in the Latin American countries. And she's going to be especially talking about a report that's come out just a couple months ago from the International Institute for Environment and Development regarding disaster expenditures and climate adaptation expenditures. So that's our lineup, and I'll give a brief introduction on what we're trying to talk about. Next slide. So just a little experience from myself. When I first started to work in statistics, I had come from a world of natural science. I was doing atmospheric research and teaching chemistry and biology. And then I changed a bit and went into a job at the National Statistics Office in Norway. And about a week after I started, my boss told me, okay, go up and talk to the expert in national accounts about developing satellite accounts. Now, I went up with a picture in my head that I thought we were going to count satellites. And Norwegian wasn't my first language, so I went up and I talked to Knut, and he was very patient and tried to explain things to me, and he just didn't, we weren't communicating. I soon found out we were not counting satellites, but we were actually simply we were going to develop supplementary statistics based on the national accounts concepts. And the first two, healthcare and travel and tourism, were some of the first types of satellite accounts that were very well defined and developed. In the US, they have now come up with marine economy, outdoor recreation, and the list goes on. And the good thing about these is it helps us take a specific focus on the part of the economy that we're interested in. And that's the idea. Can we make supplementary statistics on expenditures that have to do with disasters? Next slide, please. So when I like to have pictures in my head, and I try to sort things out and figure out how different things relate to each other. And so here I've tried to look at the ideas of what kind of expenditures are related to climate. And there's two main categories there, the mitigation and adaptation expenditures. And then we're talking about the relationship to these in terms of hazards. And there are certainly overlaps between these two concepts, and some that are not related to each other either. Earlier in the sessions at the conference, we've heard that there are many disasters that are influenced by climate, and this is one way to try to learn from what we know about climate adaptation and the mitigation expenditures and how that would overlap. Because quite often you'll get someone saying, well, what are the climate expenditures? And then somebody else will say, what are the disaster expenditures? And then someone will ask, well, what are both of these combined? And then you have to know where they overlap. Next slide, please. So here, since I have done a lot of my statistical work with environmental protection expenditure and resource management expenditures, I wanted to just also show that the work that has been done with the SIA and those of us that have worked in this area for some time, they also overlap. And again, we should understand how they overlap and some of the methodologies that have been developed related to the SIA environmental protection and resource management expenditures could be used to try and help us develop the disaster related expenditure accounts as well. So we're not starting from zero. That's what I wanted to be sure we all knew. Next slide, please. So what we have is on the left, you have to, before you can start counting something, we actually need to know what are we going to count. And those are determined often by definitions and system boundaries, what's in and out, in other words. How are we going to find it? How do we know when we found it that, yes, that is inside what we're going to count? And it's also good to know the relationships to other satellite accounts, because you want to know if you're going to talk about this whole set of information, what they are. As part of this, we also need to have other types of categories. We have expenditure types, investments, running costs. We have different types of disasters. Do we want to have the expenditures by types of disasters? Or do we want them by stages of disasters? And then, so that's oftentimes what we are thinking about and making into a statistical framework, what I would call theory. And then we have the other side of the coin, which is practical and real experience. We want to make sure our statistics answer questions that are relevant for policymakers. We want to know, what do we want to find, so we can go looking for it. But we also need to figure out what we actually do find. And right now we have 3 panelists that can help us understand this. We've got Daniel, who's going to talk a little bit about the framework for disaster-related statistics. So what I would call the theory, as well as going from the bottom up, how we experience the data. So let's move on to the next panelist, which is Daniel. He's going to give us some insights into the framework. Go ahead, Daniel.
Yes, thanks very much, Julie. Good to see you again in a slightly different context every time. So that's great. I'm very happy to be online with you. I wish I could be there in person. For those who don't know me, I used to work with our host there at ESCAP. So I would have liked to be there in person as well, but very happy I get to join this way and yeah, give a few piece of ideas from my side on this topic, which I think links very well with the economic loss topic that we were just talking about. So now I work again back to the environmental economic accounting. That's my main job at OECD. So I'm not. This is more of a work of passion for me as well. I don't get to work on this topic as much anymore. But I wanted to just say a few words based on mainly based on the past experience when I was with ESCAP and with the development of the disaster-related statistics framework. Before getting into that, just a few brief thoughts about the demand side, and I guess this would be kind of my response to the Menti question that Julie introduced there. If we go back to the Sendai framework, which kind of underpins all of this work, including the work on the disaster-related statistics framework, you see on the screen there the 4 priorities, and basically all 4 of them, but in particular the latter 3, refer to exactly this topic that we are talking about with disaster risk reduction, the interventions to reduce risks, and how we define and hopefully quantify them in terms of expenditure. So I think this is quite crucial and quite a major part of the core of the Sendai framework. So we ought to be able to measure it, and I think it's very logical to start with headline indicators of direct impacts, in particular the economic loss indicator that was just discussed. That makes sense as a priority headline indicator for this general area of work. But I think we also need to measure the interventions, the disaster risk reduction interventions, in order to give context to these impact indicators, in order that we can use economic loss or other impact statistics to assess the effectiveness of different policies, or the effectiveness of policies in different contexts and different locations. In order to apply these types of analysis to our impact variables, we need this context of, well, what were the interventions to begin with? What kind of disaster risk reduction is involved in the context of the disaster and in the context of the quantification of the impacts? So I think that's why this area is very important and very, very essential, even if it makes sense to start with the economic loss. I think that indicator would gain a lot more relevance by having the indicator on the interventions as well, so the DRR expenditure. This topic is also gaining a lot of attention, in particular in the context of climate change. and climate change adaptation, which is now highlighted a lot more in the context of the UNFCCC. And in that context, what we see evolving now, more from the user side, and which we need to link with as producers of statistics as well, is a lot of studies that sort of develop detailed case studies on the different types of disaster risk reduction interventions that we see in practice in different countries, how they are similar across countries, how they relate to the Sendai framework. And there's a lot of studies that start to do this, particularly from UNFCCC or from IPCC. And I should have on the screen there a link to one such kind of study from the OECD, since that's where I work. Some of you may find this publication from a couple of years ago quite interesting, and it also includes a long set of case studies, essentially identifying disaster risk reduction expenditure of different types. And we can use these kinds of references to start to better understand and define exactly what we were talking about. And I think that's a natural progression when you develop these kinds of new statistics or satellite accounts. Is usually the concept itself may be a bit vaguely defined. It gets more clear and clear over time, both from the demand perspective and from the producer's perspective. And the part of that process is these kinds of case studies that first sort of do a listing of the different types of DRR expected expenditure that we see across the world. And so I think we can leverage these kind of studies and try to link it with trying to develop a robust classification from the statistics producer side. Next slide. So that was, I have one other slide. So that's what I wanted to say, and I guess it's my response, as I said, to the question about the demand and how we use these statistics. Now moving on a bit to the disaster-related statistics framework, or DRSF, and my previous work at ESCAP. I'm not sure, perhaps this has already been talked about, the history here a little bit at the forum, but I think there's no harm in quickly repeating it. This work came about over a decade ago, I believe, through a decision from the member states of ESCAP, so all of the Asia Pacific governments, to prioritize working on this topic in general, the disaster-related statistics, and by bringing together the two communities, the disaster management, disaster risk reduction community, and official statistics community, to work on the problem. And it's quite an innovative and I think really excellent decision made quite some years ago by ESCAP to do that, to bring these communities together. And also, we took the approach of developing a framework, or a kind of a systems approach. So tackling these different aspects of disaster-related statistics all together in a framework, so that we can leverage from the fact that there may be overlaps between them, there may be connections between the two measurement, which can make the overall system more efficient, and I think more robust in the end, by having a coherent approach to these different domains of the statistical area. And there is an example of this from this particular topic and the development of a sort of prototype classification for DRR expenditure, which is shown on the slide there, for the case of the reconstruction costs, which is in the screen there. And also related to that, and this is an important aspect of the Sendai framework, the so-called building back better. So the building back better aspect of the reconstruction after the disaster, which we need to measure anyway for the previous topics, for measuring economic loss. So there is an overlap between the measurement of this DRR expenditure in general with the previous topic, and I think that's where we should start. In fact, because as we heard in the previous session, there are still a lot of challenges with economic loss. I think that that's a good place to start for trying to address the DRR expenditure as well. So the last thing I would say, so this is the sort of prototype classification that we developed at that time as a kind of example. In practice, it will be a little bit different in each country, depending on what kind of data they have, and depending on the way that, for example, government budgeting is doing. And that's really the way that classifications are developed. They're developed through practice. I think it's still useful for us to go through and continue to discuss this. But I think the real function of this is to serve as an example and to facilitate the discussion like we are having now, in which I really like Julie's approach of let's try to focus on the key questions, what we can do next. And my advice would be to focus on this aspect that's already an issue as well under the direct economic loss variable, which is measuring the reconstruction, whether it be through average costs or the other data sources that we have, and then trying to separate out from that piece the building back better, which is another critical aspect for the economic loss and for this aspect of the framework, which is the DRR expenditure. And I'll stop there.
Good. Thanks very much, Daniel. Our next speaker will be Polaris Batista, and he will, if you could give us the next slide, he will start giving us some insight into the experience from the Philippines. Go ahead, Polaris.
Thank you, Julie. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. So I'm here today to talk about disaster related statistics in the Philippines. So before we get into that, let me give you a brief history of our situation in the Philippines. So as you know, the Philippines is a country that is prone to natural disasters. In fact, it is one of the most disaster-prone countries in the world. Every year, the Philippines experiences an average of about 20 typhoons. These typhoons can cause widespread damage, including flooding, landslides, and crop damage. So in addition to typhoons, the Philippines is also at risk of earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and droughts. So the Philippines is working to improve its disaster risk management. The government has developed a national disaster risk reduction management plan, which outlines a comprehensive approach to disaster preparedness, mitigation, and response. The Philippines is also one of the first countries in the world to develop a disaster risk reduction expenditure account. This is a significant achievement, and it is a testament to the Philippine government's commitment to disaster risk reduction. So I'm here to discuss the challenges we've come across while compiling the account, as well as the potentials and benefits of having a DRR expenditure account in making communities safer and more resilient to disasters. So let's move to the challenges. So the first challenge would be the identification of DRR expenditure. So what really constitutes DRR spending? Not all government expenditures on disaster risk reduction are easy to identify. For instance, some government expenditures on disaster risk reduction are hidden within other budget categories, such as under social development or infrastructures. One specific example under infrastructures would be, for instance, a building would have fireproofing materials, firewalls, earthquake proofing as well. So next, under challenges would be data collection. So under data collection, we have DRR spending is often spread across different government agencies and programs. So since the data on DRR are fragmented, a strong institutional setup and good data sharing practices are needed for the collection of data. So next, under data collection, the harmonization of concepts and definitions. So different agencies may have different priorities and needs when it comes to DRR. This can make it difficult to agree on a common set of concepts and definition. So next, under data collection, we have the timeliness of data. So data from different sources may not be available in a timely manner, and since integrating data from different sources can be a complex and time-consuming process, this can delay the compilation of the accounts. So next, under the challenges, availability of data on the private sector. Private sector expenditures are often not reported, and they can be difficult to distinguish from other types of expenditures. Even the NGOs that were formed to alleviate the impacts of disasters do not report to the government. So finally, under challenges, we have the availability of disaggregated data. So basically, data on the subnational level are mostly unavailable, and specifically for the local government and regional data. So despite these challenges, disaster risk reduction expenditure accounts is actually an important tool for tracking government spending on disaster risk reduction, primarily because of its potentials, which I will be discussing in the next slide. So now we move on to the potentials in compiling DRR expenditure accounts. First, we have the alignment with priorities. So DRR expenditure accounts can help the government identify gaps in their DRR efforts by highlighting areas where government is not currently spending any money on. DRR expenditure accounts can help governments to better align their DRR spending with their priorities by providing a more comprehensive view of all the government's DRR spending. This can help government to ensure that their DRR spending is focused on the most important activities and that is not being wasted on the less important ones. So next, under potentials, we have tracking DRR investments. DRR expenditure accounts can help the government track the progress of their DRR investments by providing a way to measure the outputs and outcomes of their DRR spending. This can help the government to ensure that their DRR investments are having the desired effect and that they are being used in the most efficient way possible. So third, under potentials, we have transparency and accountability. DRR expenditure accounts can help increase transparency and accountability in government spending by making it easier for the public to see how their taxes are being spent on DRR. This can help to build public trust in government and to encourage people to support government DRR efforts. Last but not the least, under potentials, we have raising awareness. DRRE accounts can be used to promote awareness on, of the importance of DRR and to encourage public support for DRR efforts. By making DRR spending more visible, DRR expenditure accounts can help to build public understanding of the need for DRR and to encourage people to take steps to reduce their own disaster risk. So overall, disaster expenditure accounts have the potential to be a valuable tool for improving the efficiency and effectiveness of DRR spending. By providing a more comprehensive and transparent view of government spending on DRR expenditure accounts can help the government to better align their DRR spending with their priorities, identify gaps in their DRR efforts, track the progress of their DRR investments, and increase transparency and accountability in government DRR spending. So that's it for my presentation. Thank you and maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Flores. That was excellent. I always enjoy hearing from folks that have tried to do things and learn from the experience. Our next contribution will be from Diana. The floor is yours. Thank you. You've got 7 to 8 minutes. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Julie and everyone. Thank you for the invitation. Diana Cardenas, I'm with the International Institute for Environment and Development, but also with the Institute for Climate Economics. So if I can have my only slide, that would be very helpful. Thank you. Okay, so I'm very glad that Julie got started with this issue of the connection of the different topics, and especially the connection between climate change and disaster risk reduction, because that will be the topic that I will be addressing at this point. With the project I'm working for with IIED, we have developed this report, this issue paper that's called Tracking the Money for Climate Adaptation and Disaster Risk Reduction. And so what we basically did with this work is we explored country experiences to identify challenges, lessons learned, and good practices on climate budget tagging and tracking and disaster budget tagging and tracking, considering the connection between the two and the possible overlaps. And so, and the reasoning behind it's quite logical, and Julie already explained it. We have had several initiatives within this spectrum of green budgeting as a first step on environment, and then a trend of different other tools connected to climate and also on disaster risk reduction. So how do we bring all of them together, considering how interlinked they are? And even more so when we have several different international instruments that are coming into the picture. We have the SDGs as a big framework, then we have climate action, we have the UNFCCC, and we also have the same night framework, and all of them overlapping in certain points. And also a topic that is becoming more and more important and somehow connected to what Daniel was saying about building back better is the issue of loss and damage, which is becoming more and more important, and also a big topic right now in the discussions in Bonn that are taking place in preparation for COP28. So I would like maybe to tell you a little bit about this work we have done with IIED. So basically the approach we took is we consider some specific elements to see what has been done and exploring this connection between CBT and DBT. Considering leadership and coordination, who has been leading these processes, if there are any. We explored 40 different countries' experiences, and out of them we could see that 13 countries, for instance, are already doing this integration at the strategic planning level. So they have climate and disaster strategies or plans already defined. And then also we explored definitions and scope, which we could see that they were also quite different. And then the objectives also were quite different. That was another aspect we looked at. On reporting and dissemination also, we were looking at what has been done, because this is also very important from the demand side, how much and how we're communicating this information. Also checking on capacity, how this is playing out, and obviously also in this two topics, bringing them together, we can also see a big important gap in capacity. And also because when we are talking about so many different topics, and if we talk about satellites, satellite counts, or climate budget tagging and disaster budget tagging, and then there's also gender and another objectives that come into the picture, it starts becoming quite complex as well for countries to deal with all of this. And so we add another layer of complexity, which may be hard to handle already when there are capacity constraints in place. Also, we check a bit on the content of CBT and DBT interventions on testing, monitoring, and learning. We also explored a little bit something to say that's important considering our scope on budget tagging and tracking is that we saw that there's a limited work specifically on this aspect. So at the strategic planning level, we saw out of the 40 that 13 countries are already doing some work and have some instruments in place. But on the integration of this at the budget level and tagging and tracking, we saw only a couple of experiences of countries that have been doing it already with support of UNDP. Then I would like to maybe, considering the time, jump to the recommendations and way forwards, and invite you to check and review this work we have done more in depth, and also happy to address any more questions and examples in the discussion time. But I would just mention a few of the recommendations. So Obviously, one very important aspect will be the political commitment and policy coherence between and beyond climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. So what we're calling for is an integrated approach. And also, very important is the institutional arrangements and accountability frameworks across DRR and CCA. So climate change adaptation stakeholders. So there are many different coordination instances in countries regarding climate change, and then even in the context of disaster risk reduction, and the disaster risk reduction authorities are not necessarily having a big role, and we have not really been able to grasp how they are playing out a role in this part of budget tagging and tracking in our work. Also, a very important thing is multi-stakeholder engagement, because then at this point also, we're just discussing the national accounts, and we're just looking at the public side. But then we have another whole picture of the private side. Then capacity development is also a very important aspect to work on. Work on common methodologies and technical guidance on disaster and climate budget tagging and tracking is a big challenge, but this is quite generalized in all of these aspects. Even on climate finance, we also have this big challenge of lack of standardized methodologies, and we need to do some work on that. Also, saying that very few countries we identify are looking for or tagging and tracking negative expenditure. We understand negative expenditure as expenditure in activities that are not helping fulfill the objectives. So either on climate change adaptation or disaster risk reduction. And finally, this would be very important steps in this integration will also be crucial for addressing financial gaps and potential increasing potential revenues, and also to link to the discussion on loss and damage. Obviously, if we can easily integrate this two aspects, then we can have a better picture of what are the losses and damages, and maybe taking it in a different order, taking Daniel's words, it would be important to maybe start by looking at what we are seeing as impacts now, and then see what we need to improve to reduce those costs, economic costs that we're facing already. So thank you very much for this opportunity to talk about the work we have done, and I pass it on to you, Julie.
Thank you very much, Diana. Now we'll transition over to some questions, and I've prepared some questions, but let's first start with the question that actually came from online, and it goes to Polaris about the Philippine Statistics Authority. And the question is, what was the role of the PSA in creating this DRR expenditure account? When did it start? Does your country have a national disaster management system led by an agency? And in this case, how did the agency contribute to the account developed by the PSA? Can you give us a little more details then about your work?
Yes, Julie, thank you for the question. The Philippines actually has what we call the National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Council, which oversees all the NDMAs. What their part is in the production of the DRRE was to provide us with reports from their situational reports, from their post-disaster PDNAs, and then we used them to actually get actual estimates for some parts of the DRRE. So how did we start this? I remember in 2018, we were about to update the pilot DRSF tables. So that was actually with Daniel Clark. We were on the process of updating the pilot 2013 to 2015 DRSF tables. And then we've come across this DRREA and DRREB table. So I was asked by my supervisor to take a look at it and see if we would be able to produce satellite account. So what I did initially was to collect the some data that would be relevant to the tables that are already there in the DRSF. So eventually, I've collected enough data, and we compiled the accounts, and up to now we were actually updating the RRE accounts. So we have from 2015 up to the present. So that's it. Was I able to answer all the questions?
I think you did a good job. Thanks. Let's go to the next slide. And this, you're going to continue a little bit, Baptista. I noticed that when I was looking at your categories and the work you'd been doing and compared it to the DRSF, the framework, that there were different categories. On the left side, we've got the ones prevention and mitigation separated, but here you've put them together. And there's disaster management, which you really don't have as a category. And then disaster recovery is number 4. Can you tell me a little bit how you ended up with the categories that your country found useful, obviously, rather than simply using the ones that were in the table? I'm always fascinated to see what actually comes out of those of us making statistics. So give us a little insight on that, please.
Okay, so these are what we call the thematic areas for DRRE. On the left side, we have the one for the ones for the under DRSF. So on the right side, that's what we did initially in the Philippines. So essentially, both categories are the same. Let me clarify this for everyone. For the first difference, we have a separated disaster risk prevention, disaster risk mitigation, and then in the Philippines, we have prevention and mitigation. So yes, it should be separated. Unfortunately, our local data makes it difficult for us to delineate budget line items from the two thematic areas. Now for the next one, disaster management. Disaster management actually contains disaster preparedness and disaster response. In this case, we have sufficient data to have a more disaggregated approach. So that's what we did. So basically, this is an example of how we did the categories considering the data availability or the lack thereof. Ms. Julie.
Right. I've had similar experience when doing environment statistics. The classic one is you can't separate out drinking water from water management. And this is where I think that it's worth looking at people, at country examples, so that we make a system that folks can actually report to. If we can go to the next slide, please. I've got a question. There aren't any other questions I've seen in the chat. These are some things I also observed. There isn't really a definition of disaster-related expenditures and transfer. In the statistics office, we're used to using primary purpose, which I think you used in the Philippines. And it's not, there's still a lot to be done in this area. Diana, do you have some additional thoughts about this? Budget tagging isn't necessarily what actually gets spent. I'll give you a few minutes to give us some additional thoughts.
Yes, thank you, Julie. Yes, so first of all, on that part of the purpose, and so from the experiences we reviewed, so some countries do focus more on the main purpose. There are also countries that are using another approach, like a relative estimation approaches, and using weights also to classify shares going to DRR and to CCA of programs. And they're building on the real markers, normally on the CPIR, so the climate public expenditure and institutional reviews methodology of the UNDP. And so it is quite a challenge indeed to get to this. And if you can remind me that the other part of the question, that would be very useful, because I got a bit distracted by the noise. I cannot hear you.
I wanted to simply look and see, we've got budget tagging, which is always before things happen. When a disaster actually occurs, a lot of times transfers are made. So what is in a budget isn't necessarily what is actually spent. And that can be huge if there's a large disaster that comes. You can be prepared, but you oftentimes money has to go from something that it was not planned for, and boom, it's over for that. Did you have any thoughts about the difference between budgets versus actual expenditures, or experience with that?
Yeah, that's the biggest issue when we're looking at this, and the common question when we're talking about either green budgeting or climate budgeting, is that we are looking mostly at allocations and not really looking at the expenditure. And then at the ex post level, so you have some elements, and that comes more with the reporting and phase, let's say, of the budget cycle. So not so extensively we have this information of how much was actually spent, and we can know. With the CPIRs, for instance, we can do it. There are very few countries that actually do this regularly to see how much was spent, and it's very limited. And even more if you start looking at the impact. So that becomes even more complex. So it is a big challenge for this work, and also a reflection on how much we need to work on the different ways and even from the definitions, the methodologies, and even taxonomies to arrive to something that is coherent and can help us arrive to the level where we can actually pass from the say, okay, we know that based on allocations, so we know based on how much we spend and what was the actual cost that we're having, and that would be connected to losses and damages, and then we can know also how this are evolving over time, because that way we have the visibility of little by little knowing and having a historical of how much that is costing, and then we can also project and better measure that, and also the financing gap and the needs that we have on climate, on disaster risk reduction as well. So I think those are my very general comments about your question, Julie.
Good, thanks very much. Could we have the results from the Metameter poll? And Daniel, can you help me look at this, and we'll try to see what it can tell us? Okay, so we've gotten 11 answers, which is great. And okay, this came through mostly as don't see all of it on my screen. Okay, Daniel, can you give us a look and any feeling about how this is, if there's some ideas on what we need to go forward on? We've got.
Yeah, it's just on the fly here. Huh? It's a bit tricky, but I would say from what I can see, it's a bit related to the point about better understanding what kind of policies are effective. And that's I guess what I was trying to say in my opening as well, is in order to just do DRR more effectively, we need to measure it because that becomes the context for understanding the impacts when a disaster does occur, or to comparing different policies across countries. And of course, the expenditure is one of the key ways, comparable ways that we can measure an activity. So I think that a lot of these comments are along that line, basically assessing, analyzing. That's a challenge of disasters in general, is every case is different, and that's why the context is so important, and we need to do the best we can to measure to at least try to address the context in terms of DRR and interventions. And
I would agree with you, actually. I see also that there's to try and allocate resources, so to identify areas that need to be prioritized for investment, know what activities actually need investment. So I think you
yeah, and to build the case to build the case for DRR, because it's a common statement for champions in our area that it's a very good investment to invest in DRR, because it can reduce the extent of the transfers that are happening just after disaster. But we need to prove that. Yes. And I think I think that's a very powerful statement if you can back it up with evidence to show that DRR is a good investment for the society.
Right. Exactly.
Yes. If I may add something, Miss Julie.
Yes, please.
Yes. As Mr. Rahul yesterday said that we should invest in disasters, right? So now we know where to focus our investment. So I think DRE does that for us.
Yes, and I think that that's a good place to end. I think we've shown that it needs development. We need to have these types of statistics developed in a way that can be useful, and as we've seen from the Philippines, their development has been very good. I had another slide, but I don't think we have time to look at that one. So I will, because time is up, I believe. So I'll hand it back to the folks in Bangkok. Thank you very much, speakers, for my point here on the last slide was basically that there's only 2 pages of this in the manual, pretty much, and we need to develop this a bit more. And as Baptista said, oh, we finally found the annex tables at the very end of the Excel sheet, and I was told to go and do something with it. Okay, so yes, they're there, but they're really hard to find. So I would advocate that we do a little bit more work on this, folks, and make it a little bit more visible, because you can see from the responses from our poll that we actually could find a use for this. And it is an important addition to this. So back to you in Bangkok. Thanks very much to our speakers. I appreciated your taking some initiative and going on the fly a little bit with me. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Julie, and all the speakers. Should we just give a hand to Julie also for the chairing here? Good. Yes. So we are now having a break of 10 minutes, and we'll start back here at 5 minutes to 9 o'clock Bangkok time in 10 minutes from now to everyone joining us online. Thank you.
Happy birthday to you. Dun, 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 dun.
Are we ready to go?
Yeah, sure.
All right, so we are back in session. Everyone's smiling.
Yeah.
It's 9 p.m. here in Bangkok, and it's time for our very last hybrid session of this third expert forum. We are looking at a session where we will try to summarize. I want to at the outset thank my fellow session organizers from ECE and UNDRR, and also thank Mr. Irakli, who's sitting here next to me, for kindly agreeing to moderate a session that has a very large number of speakers, as you can see around this table. We have a full house here for the final batch. Next slide, please. Before I hand over to our moderator, I will start by outlining the objective of this session and the free session questions, as we've all become used to for our sessions here. And I don't believe there will be much of a surprise to anyone what the objective of this session is, which is to summarize highlights and outcomes of the expert forum and outline some priority next steps. And we've set ourselves 3 questions that we hope that we can manage together to answer by the end of these 55 minutes. Did the expert forum meet our expectations? Which priority needs for capacity development, technical assistance, research, or standards were identified by the forum? And last but not least, where do we go from here? What we will do is to try to answer these questions by really hearing a voice from each of the sessions that we have had over the past 3 days. And that's, of course, what explains the many people around this table and also several speakers lined up online. I'll leave the details of that to Mr. Irakli, our moderator. So with that introduction, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Ricky, very much. Yeah, it's time to summarize and bound the last session, this forum, and the last session, these 9 sessions serve this purpose also. Despite this specific time of the forum, I mean afternoon and evening mode, which had its objective reasons, despite this fact, the lesson were carrying on still interesting, both in audience and through the online platform. So during the last day, we have lots of discussion on the main topics. So experience of different countries and regions were shared. So we talked a lot about defining direct and indirect impact of disaster. So measuring the human impact of disaster, measuring the impact of disaster on environmental and cultural heritage, estimating the economic losses of disaster, accounting for the cost of disaster is reducing. There was a daily discussion and conversation about main challenges. It's important part. I know that important part were right down on the desk on the flip chart, and I hope it will be saved and used successfully. So from all the above, a simple question arises. Did we get to where we wanted? Next slide, please. Yeah. What do you say? Of course, I have my opinion on this, but until then, I'm interested in your feedback. Everyone's opinion is very interesting, but we certainly don't have a time ask everyone. So therefore, I will first look at the whole. If anyone wants to express their feedback. No way. Okay, if not, I myself will go to the respondents according to my wish. No. Okay, I want to refer to Tonga representative, Male. You know what does Male mean in Georgian? It is soon, fast. So Male, as soon as possible, provide your feedback in this direction. Take 2 minutes.
Thank you for this shocking moment. What did I get what I wanted? Yes, I did. I got the knowledge and the learning, and actually it's all the peer-to-peer sharing. It's very important, especially when we have nothing in place in Donga in the statistics office. So I learned a lot. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. And now I would like to invite some of the experts and our colleagues for discussion. So there are people who led the forum session during these 3 days and who contributed significantly to the successful implementation of this forum. Dear colleagues, before I refer to you, so I would like to express my sincere appreciation for your participation in the forum. So your expertise and your experience and your insight, it's very important in advancing our understanding of climate change and disaster-related statistics. I have a little task for you. Next slide, please. So please outline briefly so 2 priority needs significant identified in our session and 2 points for action going forward. So I have to start from second session's moderator. It's Mrs. Lopez from Mexico. I hope Mexico representative is with us.
Yes. I'm here.
Okay, thank you very much. So session 2, assessing and mapping risk exposure, vulnerability, coping capacity. Please take 2 minutes and underline and so outline main feedbacks in this direction, please.
Yes, thank you very much for this opportunity to share the main conclusion of this session. And to answer also the question that you did at this when we started this session, the disaster disrupt national economies and affect lives with significant direct and indirect impacts and costs. And the NSOs, as we discussed in the session, face several challenges in disaster risk management, such as those related to data collection, quality, integration of information from many sources, capacity building, interinstitutional coordination, and effective communication. We have a huge amount of data available from different sources, as I mentioned. We must be able to understand, manage, integrate, and disseminate through the development of data hubs, for example, specialized disasters. Could be a good way for the NSOs, and we need to promote the use of non-conventional methodologies as the satellite images, administrative records, to contribute with information more and more timely as the institution requires, and sharing experiences, knowledge, capacity, and technical building, etc. And finally, we identify the need to strengthen the collaboration with the NSS to have a better response and management of the disaster cycle. And is some of the reflection that we have from this our session 2, and you could see at the screen is some of priority needs and priority actions that summarized the ideas that we discuss and share on this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I go to the session 3. Session 3 leader. Next slide, please. Yeah, it's Kanza. So the Kanza, same direction, same task. Please summarize your session's feedback in 2 minutes.
Well, the countdown is on. Thank you very much. So on the next slide, we've just sort of, summarized. Now, there was a lot of things we wanted to put in this slide, but we were told quite specifically by Rike, absolutely not. You can only have 2 things in each. So I put 2 really big bullet points to get around that. Anyway, so what we identified in terms of priority needs is that there's importance of needing to communicate and collaborate around agreed hazard taxonomy. So we talked about the hazard information profiles and what's sort of become visible through the feedback that we've had on the Menti is that not everybody's familiar with them, or not everybody is sure who should be the ones sort of working on those or leading on implementation. So it's important that actually when we talk about disaster-related statistics, that the collaboration is beyond national statistical offices, because we recognise that actually disaster-related statistics is a multifaceted approach. And it's also a priority to develop good disaster-related statistics taxonomy that's contextualized, so actually it can be used for both local and national needs. In terms of actions going forward, it's really important that we begin to communicate and promote the hazard information profiles and explore how they can be used as the basis of disaster-related statistics and guidance and support for the development of cross-governmental approaches when it comes to implementing hazard taxonomies. And a key thing that everybody has talked about is that we need to be looking at capacity and resource development, so we can actually enable the development and implementation of disaster-related statistics and associated hazard taxonomies. And hopefully that's within 2 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ganza. Thank you very much. So our next respondent came from online platform, James Norris, United Kingdom representatives. James, are you with us?
Hello there.
Oh, thank you. Please.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
Fantastic.
yeah, sure. Great.
So as a previous speaker said, 2 minutes is a very short time to summarize the hour-long discussion that we
You can
had.
take additional 1 minute.
Oh, no, I timed it to 2, so it's okay. So I would like to start and just by, of course, thanking the panelists who were able to provide the insight for us and for your contribution in the room. And I know there was a strong discussion afterwards. If you could move on to the next slide, please. I think it has the priority needs and the defining actions. Thank you very much. Some of the key areas we talked about were actually around, and it was just reflected on, was the concise need of definitions. In our case, we were specifically talking about the definitions of direct and indirect losses and how that relates to disaster-related statistics. Specifically, we were talking about the gaps both in the national statistical societies and organizations, but also more broadly within disaster risk management offices and DRR plans to enable actually us to have better preparedness, coordination, response, and resilience to all aspects of that disaster cycle. So some of those were the priority needs, and how actually we start moving ourselves towards the role of disaster-related statistical frameworks and how they can start to bring in and start to understand vulnerabilities that people have. And then specifically as actions, some of the key things that we have underlined on that slide and we have talked about is the need to engage with policymakers. So policymakers, both at a national statistical level, but also regionally and globally, how those policymakers help to shape and use the vulnerability indexes, the statistical analyses to provide a full life cycle of disaster risk management activities. And then finally, we talked through the fact that ultimately there is that need for more granular detail, the fact that the detail needs to be useful and fit for purpose, and that collectively as a community, we need to be able to have trust in that data and to make sure it is used both for the modeling, hazard identification, and resilience. So hopefully I haven't overrun that 2 minutes, and thank you for that extra minute or two, but handing back to you. But thank you all for your time in the session yesterday.
Thank you very much. So, yeah. Okay, now. So the next panelist or next respondent is Mr. Hussein, also from online platform, right? Mr. Hussein, or? Oh, I'm sorry. You are in audience. It's my fault. I'm sorry. plus additional 2 minutes for my fault.
Thank you for giving me 2 extra minutes for this. So the human impact on the disaster, I think the priority should be people-centric and human recovery approach. And for that matter, we need to identify and provide the required mandate to the agency to lead the process. The second point which I would like to make is that there needs to be a pre-identification of focal person, because every time the disaster happens and we look around for people who are relevant to provide the information. So pre-identification of the focal person for effective coordination mechanism at all level of the government. The third is the effective use of technology. And for that matter, why it is necessary to have a baseline information for the pre-disaster and post-disaster impact to analyze the human impact. And lastly, it's the necessary training for the field teams to select the core and the sub-core indicators that are relevant. And I think it's less than 2 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And again, I'm so sorry for my mistake. Now looking for a line of my was next to me. Okay. Second, next respondent is Hemdem Regmi, my colleague, Deputy Chief of Party, Statistics Nation Science Office of Nepal. Please.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Our topic was basically on the invisible side of the impact of disaster on environment, ecosystem, and culture, which is quite difficult to measure. That's why the priority needs is associated with the establishment of the formal framework, which should coordinate among the management of the increased harmonization and better use of the disaster management, particularly focusing on that SEA, System of Environment Economic Accounting. And then second one is the cultural heritage is the most important issue, which shows us our history and civilization. That's why we have to take the stock of those environmental assets, and then for that purpose we have to invest in the earth observation systems as well, not only for physical appearance, but implementation on the artificial intelligence, and then ensuring that data consistency and support for the rapid damage assessments are in place in many countries. For that purpose, we have identified 2 priority actions. The first one is the adoption and use of these existing frameworks like SEA in the disaster management. Though there is some linkage between the DRSF and SEA, but we want to make this SEA as a principal framework for the measurement of the disaster-related activities in the environment, economy, and their interlinkages. For example, on estate accounting, on catastrophic losses, or even in ecosystem accounts, we need to focus that SEA principles rather than DRSF. And then second one is, as usual, like other teams, the capacity development, updating of the guidelines, calculating of the environmental and cultural heritage laws based on the international standards again. Those standards are there in the form of the SEA and PDNA, but we need more concrete guidelines. That was the discussion on the session 6. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to turn to another my colleagues from Malaysia, Suraya Komari.
Okay, actually, I will be talking on the session 8 on the discussion, right? On the afternoon session regarding the estimating economic events for disasters. So what is the best practices, challenges, and way forward? So what are the priority needs we have identified is on practical guidance document on valuing the economic loss. That can be used by all the countries as a reference. And the second one was the strengthening international and national efforts to support the implementation of the guidance document. And of course, it will come with the actions. So the priority actions is to put this on the agenda of the United Nations Statistical Commissions. And of course, yeah, let's do it. Let's just do it. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next respondent is Julie Hess, Bureau of Economic Analysis, USA representatives. I hope Julie is with us.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Julie. Please.
Great. So our session, which we just had the privilege of having, I would say we identified two needs. One is related to definitions and terminology, because when I put on my disaster glasses, mitigation and adaptation meant one thing, and then when I put my mitigation and adaptation climate change glasses on, they meant something else. So we've got confusing terms that need to be cleaned up, and we need to further develop exactly what we're talking about. Another thing that came up both in the discussion and the presentations was that the data that we're mostly working with right now is government budgets. And that's often where we start working with these types of satellite accounts. But we actually need to start thinking about what are the ways to include private sector data and non-government spending. In terms of priority actions, we are needing both methodological and technical guidance development. We're doing budget analysis at the NSOs. Then we're talking about budget tagging at the government ministries. And then we are actually, when we're wanting to make statistics for satellite accounts, we're actually looking at actual expenditures. And all of these different things are going to be confusing. We're going to have different numbers at different times, and this is going to be challenging. And a final recommendation or action is to not look at this in isolation, but start to try and think of these things together with climate adaptation and disaster-related expenditures together. And I would also advocate that we put it into the SEA context of environmental protection expenditures and resource management and ecosystem development that way. So these were some of the probably the main things and priorities that we came out of the last session. And I hope that we in the future can also have more than 2 pages and the last 2 sheets in an Excel file. So that would be my advocacy there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now I want to refer country participants, country representatives, capturing Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday afternoon session, respectively. The task and homework is same. So 2 priority needs identified in their session and 2 point for action going forward. So I want to start from my neighborhood and ask you, Nira from Armenia, please.
Thank you, Georgia. Yeah. I have given the honor to summarize the brilliant ideas collected from the tables. And what was very interesting that depending on who was sitting around the table, and who resisted on his idea. So that was the difference. But in general, all these ideas, it was possible to collect, summarize in 2 or 3 general approach. So priority needs. I'll change the order a little bit, improving collaboration between users and producers. What is needed for that? The ideas given were implement data sharing agreements,
or memorandums may be taking into account privacy concerns. And this is the main approach for statisticians, of course. The next one, harmonization of standards, opportunities to integrate data sets. What is the main action to do that? Agree on definitions and standards between different agencies and provide guidance and common formats, templates to users and producers. And one more thing, for countries that they need translation of these guidelines, it's very important to disseminate that information. The next step, improve capacities, fundings, and expertise. So what do we need for that? For example, this is a country approach, sectorial review to align important sectors of national systems with European standards, the compliance to the quality assurance framework. It is needed. It is very important step, I think. So developing tools, indicators for monitoring the implementation of action plans. This is also a new thing, a new step for measuring where is the country, how it is implementing the ideas, these actions that are written on the papers. So developing these kind of indicators. And one more interesting idea was highlighted, statistical officers appointed in other agencies. So this will give
dans d'autres agences
to get directly from the needed statistical data.
datos estadísticos directamente.
Thank you.
كانت هذه هي.
Thank you, Nara. Thank you for your completely outline. And now I want to refer to Michael Nagy, my friend and my colleagues from UNSC. So Michael, your involvement in your opinion is always important. And please, don't care about time. You have a lot of time.
Thank you very much, Irakli. So yesterday, Bangkok afternoon, we organized the afternoon in form of a workshop where we discussed certain issues related to the classification of hazards and disasters and the hazard information profiles. So this was organized by Kanta, who already spoke today, who you know, and the team from the UK Health Security Agency. And I think one big objective has been achieved with this workshop simply by informing participants about the existence of these hazard information profiles and how they can be used as a kind of backbone for developing disaster-related statistics and what the benefits are for countries themselves, but also in the reporting towards international organizations and all in all in the harmonization of this information. So I think this was a very important outcome. So simply to inform and then to engage in a discussion with country groups about the usefulness and about the challenges that are related to it. Actually, the outcomes of this work feed also in an ongoing but soon closed project that we run together with the team from UK Health Security Agency, where we would like to get feedback from the statistical experts and statistical perspective on these hazard information profiles, on the feasibility to implement it and implement them and so on, because this can help in the further refinement of the HIPs, in the description, in providing recommendations and so on. So in the discussion, the HIPs were new for many of the participants, but from what they've heard from the presentations, they considered, I think, all as useful to have him. But there were certain needs, and we limited to 2 needs here, but I think these are the most important ones. So assuming there is a common understanding, that is something really, really useful on levels for the harmonization, but the needs is to have political engagement and leadership to support high quality disaster-related statistics including increased disaster-related statistics literacy on all levels, meaning on the policymaker levels, but also on the expert level and on the general public, because only then you can understand why this is so important. And of course, the second need was the knowledge and the resource capacity for the production, including the understanding of how HIPs relate to the national context. The HIPs have been developed from a global perspective. We know that there are indigenous way, for example, how to look at his hazards. There are many different ways and experiences. So also the national context is relevant here. And this is a need to understand this, and therefore experts need to look at it to see how this relates to the cases, to the situation. So these are the needs. What are the actions we cheated here a little? No, it's two actions actually. We said one is, it was under more bullet points first, but we had one main national action is that it could be useful to have national champions who really utilize disaster-related statistics and hazard taxonomies in national planning projects and informing decision makers, including showing information gaps. So what does this mean? This means we should not have information silos in countries. We should not have different organizations informing about the same thing in different ways. So this is very important to really utilize this in the harmonized way and to show also the policymakers how this can be used and how useful it is. Then also there was a call towards international organizations and donors to have a coordinated approach to support capacity development. Often donors have their focal points, they have the specific mandate, and this can again lead to the creation of information silos in the country, and this is what we don't want. I leave it here. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And I now ask to Maldivian representative statistician Ashiyat Shazna. Okay, please.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and today afternoon session was actually on estimating economic losses from disasters and the practices actually countries are practicing and the challenges and the way forward we discussed. And we had long discussions in 4 groups and on key 4 areas, and it was mainly on the agriculture sector. And we came up with 4 key outcomes and actions we would come up with. And on agriculture sector, it was recommended to use of adjusted weighted market prices at the time of for estimation of economic losses, and it was recommended by the agriculture discussions. And on housing and infrastructure sector, replacement cost is the preferred approach. It was agreed upon all countries, and there should be an effort by countries to develop buildings registers as well as associated price indices as well to strengthen these areas. And on slow onset disasters, it was agreed that there is a need for a common practical framework for measuring the impacts of slow onset disasters and hazards at all levels, including the international, regional, and national and local level as well. And on the NDMA and the Disaster Management Authority and the NSO's collaboration, it was agreed that the NSO statisticians should be involved throughout the process of valuing economic losses for providing support as well as training for the disaster management staff on the ground to validate in the final figures as well. And I believe these actions really need and depends on the human resources as well as the financial resources as well as the technical expertise as well. This support is really required to overcome these actions as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And next slide, please. So we want to share you the general result of our survey. So there are highlighted question of the forum: where do we go from here? Which is moderated as which of the following options would be most effective for enhance the availability of indicators on environment, climate change, and disaster in the long term in your countries. So half of the respondents preferred stronger cooperation, stronger stronger institutional collaboration, 50%. So my Oscar goes to this answer too. So second place is stronger capacity skills for development of indicators, 26%. There are next comes with 16% stronger data production and stronger data exchange with 8%. So now, yeah, sure.
Yes, sorry for interrupting here. I just want to explain to people what they are actually seeing. These are the preliminary results of the participant survey that you have all received. And by now we have around 50 responses. So just wanted to give you that piece of information. Sorry about that, Irakli.
No, thank you very much. So as I'm informed, from the online platform, Animesh also waiting for us, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So I want to ask, outline the needs and priorities of relevance for IAG going forward. So please, Animesh.
Thanks, Chair. And I really wanted to congratulate everyone because this has been such a productive forum for all of us. It's unfortunate that I have not been able to be in person as I was planning to be, but the messages that are coming from the forum are very well translated into the climate forum here in Bonn, which is ongoing, because there's a recurrent greater need for investment in data and statistics, which is being pointed out by multiple sessions, including the global stocktake discussions that happened yesterday. So having seen and following online many of the discussions, it's from speaking on behalf of the Interagency and Expert Group on Disaster-Related Statistics and together with my co-chair, Ricky. I think it's very clear that we need to move very fast and substantively on developing the global common framework on disaster-related statistics. We do have the necessary materials. There is enough intent. There is a big need to do it. And I think moving forward, this is one point that we will definitely discuss tomorrow at the Interagency and Expert Groups meeting in terms of how to take this forward. And the recommendations and suggestions that have been made by this forum provide very substantive feedback into this process. Having said that, I would also want to point to some of the key points that I was taking note of. For example, the process of having the right standards in place is one of the key contributions from the statistical community. We have done well in terms of standardizing hazard classification, which is a big improvement over our current understanding in context of multi-hazard nature of disaster risk. We have better measures of losses and damages and calculating disaster impact. But we also understand that we need further investment into definitions, methods for both direct and indirect losses. We also need to further invest in the development of data standards and data sharing protocols and arrangements. So moving forward, the disaster-related statistics community so far feel that we have continually focused on disaster impact, focusing on loss and damage data, for example. We do feel that we need to also enhance our focus on the prevention agenda. So what's the role of the statistical community in furthering and substantiating the prevention of disaster risk and disasters is one key area that we need to further focus on. This also brings us to the discussion on the climate change agenda. We need to definitely use our indicators and metrics to shape and size the global goal and adaptation, the global stocktake, but also the loss and damage agenda, which really needs a lot of data, in particular on slow onset events. One thing which I just noted was also in context of the need for greater inter-institutional collaboration, which is, I think, the highlight of this forum as well, in particular with geospatial community that kept coming up in each of the slides, and leverage learnings from different regional organizations. So I think those are my key takeaway messages, which we will flag to the IAG meeting tomorrow. So back to you, and thank you very much for your collaboration.
Thank you very much, Animesh. Thank you. So thank you, our forum participants, and I will now return to myself and ask the question. It's fixed at the beginning of the forum. So what would be my expectation? So maybe I hope you remember that it was my opinion that I far from any view and any insight that any mission or event or forum solve the challenges and the difficulties we are facing. But my and your, I hope your expectation also is that this forum give us right direction, right recommendation to overcome and solve and to overcome this problems we are facing. And during this last 3 days, it was bolstering this idea in my brain. It's bolstering, and I'm very happy for it. And now I thanks to all the participants, especially Ricky, who put a lot of effort into organizing this event very well. And now maybe it's time to call her for a closing word.
Thank you so much, Irakli, for moderating this session, and thank you to all of you who spoke. But it is not the end of the expert forum. Actually, it's the end of the hybrid part, because here in Bangkok we can still enjoy each other's company for another 2 days. Yes, I mean, it may be close to 10 o'clock at night, but, you know, I'm sure we'll all wake up tomorrow having, you know, been re-energized. But it is really my time also now to say thank you. I want to say thank you to all the speakers, all the chairs, the moderators, the presenters, all the participants who've so actively contributed to the forum so far. And I want also to give a few notes of special thanks because, as you've seen, we have been a lot of co-organizers of this forum. So a special thank you to the co-organizers. Those in Bangkok include ECA, ECE, ESCAP, UNDRR, UKSHA. I'm not getting used to that acronym, CANSA. And also our co-organizers who could not be here in Bangkok, ECLAC and UNSD. I thought it was quite a feat that both of our virtual co-organizers managed to pull together 2 excellent sessions also. I want also to say a special note of thanks to the session lead organizers, because quite a few of them have stayed in the background a bit and let other people chair and present, etc. And that includes for session 1, Michael from ECE, thank you. For session 2, Georgina Alcantara from ECLAC. Session 3, Kansa. Session 4, Marky Liff from UNSD. The next session, Wafa from ESCAP. Wafa, where are you? You are sitting there. And the last 2 sessions, my 2 colleagues here from ESCAP, Tirapong and Ida. So thank you all for that. I know how difficult it is to pull these sessions together with people being coerced into doing a lot of things in different parts of the world. And last, of course, but not least, thank you, a big thank you to my own team here in Bangkok. It's going to be a bit of an interim thank you to all of you. And I mean, all of you have hopefully managed to speak with them and also benefit from all their support. But it is an interim thank you because we will be going strong for another 2 days. So we will have hopefully a chance to thank each other also in person come end of Friday. I personally find that the 3rd expert forum, the 3 days we can now look back at, have been very, very substantive in the focus of our discussion. And I'm also so pleased that we are starting to look at COVID as something that's past us, which is part of why we have been, many of us, in the same room. And I think we have, at least for me, it's an opportunity to rediscover, you know, the added value of those in-person interactions. So I want to thank you also that's another special thanks just here at the end to all of you here who are here in person. I feel that that has been an opportunity to really dig in. I look very much forward to next year's expert forum. I mean, we are continuing, as Animesh just mentioned, also with our global expert group. The aim is to continue these forums on an annual basis. We will get back to all of you once we've figured out, you know, who can pull their weight and organize, etc. But wherever and whenever that will be, I really look forward to seeing as many of you as possible there. So that ends our hybrid sessions of the forum. So thank you very much, all of you.
Better we take a picture with happy smile as a final session.
Oh, why only one picture?
Okay.
Why not? Why not? Okay. So should we try to stand in front of the screen and then ask our Zoom participants to put on their cameras? Yeah, let's give it a go.
Their religions are far away from civilization, and their way is good. Surprise and danger. Students trek over 5 kilometers coming untouched wilderness subject. Therefore, 7-day-long.
Oh, and it's great to see you all online there. Please have a little patience with us in the room. It's a lot of bodies to move. Oh, yes. Can I also ask our excellent interpreters to put on your cameras? And that was a special thank that I did forget. So can I ask you all for an applause to the interpreters who've been with us? So, okay. Come up here.
This is remote and inaccessible for us. The company.
Yeah, why? Barrier in the way. She's a birthday lady.
Yes. Yes. Good. Thank you again, online participants, interpreters, etc. You are all done now. Thank you and bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Just a reminder for everyone. Don't forget that the vans leave the hotel at 8 o'clock. So if you want to plan your sleep and breakfast, do so now, and then see you tomorrow at the UN building.
Take over.